Well, I want to start off by welcoming our friends at the Watkins and the mall campuses. Let's welcome them together, shall we? It's always good to have you folks with us. We are coming down to the wire. This is chapter 30 of 31 chapters in the story, and we continue to connect the dots between God's upper story and our lower story. And a key person to do that is Paul the apostle, Saul who became Paul. And this is actually the third of three lessons about Paul. And what a remarkable person he was, just in the time that God needed the person like Paul to take the Old Testament and the Gospels and the book of Acts and to help us tie them all together and integrate or appreciate the systematic way God put his story together. We have Paul coming along. And the theme today is passing the baton, how Paul was concerned with passing the responsibility for his ministry on to those yet to come. But as I was thinking about passing the baton this week, I was struck by three things this week that happened in our lives, in our nation, if you will. As you know, I record on Wednesday. This is Wednesday afternoon. It was just yesterday that we received word that Barbara Bush died. And we'd only heard, I think, last weekend that she decided to go on palliative care and not to go home to die. And then she died within a couple of days. And I was just so struck by her and how the people have responded to her. Bipartisan response. All kinds of media, different camps of the media or different political parties internationally, people had a great respect for Barbara Bush, one of only two women in the world to be the wife of a president and also the mother of a president. But she was just a remarkable lady. And I think about the baton that she left in a way for us to pick up and to follow that example that she lived. And then, did you watch the Boston Marathon or see any reports about that? And the first time since 1985, we had a runner from the United States win. Her name is Desiree Linden, Des they call her. And she wasn't even born the last time that the U.S. won the women's part of the marathon. But this Des Linden was a remarkable person. And if you saw any of the human interest about this, early on in the race, I mean, the race is 26 point some miles long. 6 miles in the race, she's not feeling good. It's very cold and raining. And she's thinking, well, I'm probably not going to finish this race. I'm going to drop out. But she was aware of her teammate and her friend. And she's telling the teammate this. And the teammate has to go to the bathroom. Can you imagine that? And so, guys, you're not going to believe this, but this woman in the Boston Marathon made a pit stop at one of the porta potties and completed the pit stop in 13 seconds. How's that? Can you imagine that? But this Des Linden decided, well, I'll at least stay in the race for my friend and encourage her and keep her going. Maybe she'll catch up to the leaders that are way up by that point. And so Des Linden stays in the race and demonstrates such sportsmanship there just to support her friend, that she's really fully not expecting to finish. But she got her second or third wind or second legs under her or whatever, and she ended up winning the race. She'd been in a multitude of marathons in her life, but never won before. She's run in the Olympics before, but never won anything until this Boston Marathon, and that was so huge. And she was she was so proud to do that for the United States. So it made you proud. So we have people like Barbara Bush and Des Linden in the Boston Marathon. And then just last night, the tragic occurrence where the jet plane engine blew up on a Southwest flight. It was going from LaGuardia to Texas, as I recall, and they had a jet engine blow up, and right around Philadelphia. And a part of the engine came through a window and actually they lost one passenger. I think there might have been 145 passengers. This one woman who had a window seat was killed tragically. What my focus today is on the pilot that saved the day for that plane. And this woman's name is Tammy Jo Schultz. And It says this about her. Tammy Jo Schultz, who safely landed the stricken Southwest Airlines flight on Tuesday, got her first flying experience in the U.S. Navy. She would touch down F-18 fighter jets at 150 miles an hour on aircraft carriers. Can you imagine that? Tammy Jo may have drawn on her Navy skills when one of the two engines on her Boeing 737 blew and broke apart at 32,000 feet on Tuesday, forcing her to implement a rapid descent towards Philadelphia International Airport. The explosion killed one passenger. Tammy Jo Schultz was one of the first female fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy. She calmly told air traffic control in Philadelphia that part of her plane was missing, that she would need ambulances on the runway. So we have a part of the aircraft missing, so we're going to need to slow down a bit, she told the controller. Many of the 144 passengers sang her praises on social media after the pilot took the time as each person got off the plane to thank them for their bravery as they left. And that really made an impression on the people on the jet. Went on to say this about Tammy Jo Schultz. She may never have become a pilot if she had not been so determined to fly from a young age. She is quoted in a fighter plane blog saying that she tried to attend an aviation career day in high school, but was told they did not accept girls. A native of New Mexico, she never lost the urge to fly, and after studying medicine in Kansas, she applied to the Air Force. The Air Force would not let her take the test to become a pilot, but the U.S. Navy did. She was one of the first female F-18 pilots and became an instructor before she left the Navy in 1993 and joined Southwest Airlines. A Christian, she is married to a fellow pilot. They have 2 children. Schultz said that sitting in the captain's chair gives her the opportunity to witness for Christ on almost every flight. God sent his angels to watch over us, she said about the emergency landing in Philadelphia. So I lift up these 3 women as modern-day heroes who, in a sense, passed the baton on to us by their example. When I think about passing the baton, I first think about track events where they have relay races, and there's so much involved in effectively, efficiently passing the baton to the person coming up behind you to run the next leg of the race. But then I remembered our daughter Amanda, a big part of her life has been music. And when she graduated, high school graduation, we had a party. And it happened that for one semester, she had the same band director I had when I was in band many, many years before. His gift to her was one of his favorite batons. And so he passed his baton on to her and essentially was saying, I believe you've got what it takes. I'm entrusting the future to you. And so I think about that, and I think about the examples that we're going to see today as we look at biblical heroes of the faith who passed on the baton. The first place that I would look is Ephesians 4, some very familiar verses from 11 through 16. Paul writes this to the Christians in Ephesus. We know from reading the book of Acts that he spent 2 years starting this church, establishing this church, right in the hotbed of the Gentile world. There were no Christians there. There were all kinds of false idolatries and things like that. But Paul established this church, and he later writes to the Christians in Ephesus. He's from jail. He's in jail when he writes to them. He says this, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and we become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. He goes on to say, then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows, and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. Very strong statement about who we're to be as the church. And he says that these officers or these leaders of the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, the teachers, their job is to equip God's people for works of service. For many centuries, there was a misunderstanding about that particular verse. The King James Version adds its own punctuation. There was very little punctuation in the Greek language, and so the translator had to add punctuation. And because the old-time King James Version put a comma where there probably shouldn't be a comma, verse 12 would read, to equip, he gives these officers of the church to equip his people for works of service. The comma going there, it's like it's the job of the pastors and teachers and the others to equip the people to do the works of service, and it just misleads you. It's the job of the pastors and teachers and those other officers to equip the people for the works of service, or the works of ministry, if you will. So maybe you've seen churches that do something like this. If we had a sign out front with my name on it, it would say, Pastor Bill Vallet, ministers, members of the congregation. That's the biblical understanding. Is my job is to help equip you to be ministers of the congregation. Until when? Until we reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God. Our objective is to have unity, whether it's at the Pine City campus or at the Regal Cinema campus or it's the Glen Theater in Watkins, Glen. Unity is so very important. May nothing divide us. May nothing interrupt or take away from that unity. He talks about the ligaments holding things together. My biology is a little old time. I had to look it up. But ligaments are what hold the bones together, or the bones to cartilage. Is that right, Gail? Gail's here. And so we're to be held together with the unity of the bond of Christ, subject to the head. We are, I give credit to Sarah Height. She just gave me this. You know, people accuse people like Sue Dunlap you've been voluntold by Sue. You know, hi, Sue. Or maybe they would even say that you've been voluntold by Pastor Bill once in a while. But you know, we are voluntold by God. We are called by God to be in ministry. We're not volunteers. We're not called to simply be volunteers. That means we can come and go as we please. But we are called to get off the bench and into the game. And we are voluntold by God to find how God has gifted us and to be equipped by the pastors and the teachers and the leaders in our church to serve, to do our part, as it says there, to grow and build ourselves up in love as each part does its work. So it's not clericalism, which was the mark of many centuries of the church from the time of Christ down until just recently. The idea was that the clerics or the clergy did the ministry and everybody else just stood by and evaluated or judged them and whether they did a good job or not. But we are called, we are voluntold by God, called to ministry. Ministry is service. There is no place for volunteers, really, in the church. We're all called to find our ministry. Does that make sense? And if you look at that last couple of verses, verse 15, speaking the truth in love, we will grow up to become in every respect. And then it says, from him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love. And so, are you building yourself up for the benefit of the future generations? Are you building yourself up so that the baton can be passed from our generation to a generation yet to come? Grow up, build yourself up, do your part, and discover what your part is. I was a very inept member of the high school band compared to my daughter, who was the best. Probably the best. She was the student of the year in the band when she graduated. But not me, you know. If they had a third chair baritone, I would have had it probably, you know. But something that was conveyed to me by this director who passed his baton to Amanda was the importance of every member of the organization. So whether you play third chair and nobody recognizes anything you do, or whether you're first trumpet, it doesn't really matter. The band is only going to be as good as the weakest link. And so he really challenged us. He really raised the standard. We're called to raise the standard. And as we get ready to pass the baton to another generation, that it's something that is a high standard and high expectations. Now, I say all that to come now to three biblical examples of persons who passed the baton to people to follow them. And often during the story, I've taken the liberty of jumping ahead. We've been in the Old Testament, and I'll jump ahead to some New Testament example. In our case today, I'm doing some jumping back, if you will. We're going back, first of all, to Moses and Moses' example. A couple of verses from Deuteronomy 30, near the very end of Moses' life, say this. Moses is speaking, "This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life. He will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." How are those for powerful words? He is saying three things there: to love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, hold fast to him, and know that the Lord is your life. And so that's Moses' effort to encourage the people to pick up the baton, the responsibility of leadership, and to carry that forward for the generations to come. And then roughly 1,500 years after Moses, if scholars have the dates about right, comes Jesus. And we see Jesus passing on the baton to his immediate disciples, 11 at this time, because Judas is no longer counted among them. And Jesus' prayer in John 17, read the whole John 17 when you get a chance. That whole chapter is a prayer. These are just a few highlighted verses, 20 through 23. Jesus is praying, and obviously the disciples are listening in when he says this: "My prayer is not for them," meaning the disciples right then. "My prayer is not for these disciples alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be as we are, be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." Unity was mentioned by Paul in Ephesians 4. We see it here in Jesus' prayer. He's praying that we will be one so that the generations to come will appreciate who he is, and that the world looking at the church will know that Jesus is indeed sent by God. He prays in verse 23 for complete unity. He is saying, Father, that just as you and I are one, as we are one together, may my followers be one, so that the world will know that you, God, sent me, Jesus, and that you loved your people just as you loved me. I ask that we sing today during Holy Communion, a very familiar song. I think you could finish the sentence. They'll know we are Christians by our love. And that's Jesus' prayer, is that we will have that love that will convince people of the legitimacy of our Christian faith. So we go back to the examples of Moses and Jesus passing on the baton. And now we come to Paul, and we're winding up 3 lessons on Paul. How does Paul pass the baton on? By the way, we're going to be looking now at 2 Timothy, the first chapter and the last chapter. There's only 4 chapters in Paul's second letter to Timothy. And I'd like to lift up some verses from each of those. But we think 2 Timothy's actually his last letter, even though in the New Testament you find a couple more, Titus and Philemon, are two more letters of Paul that come after Second Timothy. Second Timothy is clearly his swan song, if you will. It's his last message. And he says this to Timothy: every time I say your name, Timothy, in prayer, which is practically all the time, I thank God for you. I give thanks for your faith that was handed down from your grandmother Lois. Now, Lois, his grandmother, passed the baton to his mother Eunice. From your grandmother Lois to your mother Eunice, and now to you. The baton has now been passed from the grandmother to the mother to Timothy. These are Christian women that have, kind of like Barbara Bush, maybe, who have influenced him greatly. And they're no longer with him, but the baton has come to him from them. He goes on to say, I want to remind you to fan into flames the strength and boldness God gave you when I laid my hands upon your head and blessed you. He's had was that a triple blessing? His grandmother, his mother, and now he's had the Apostle Paul lay his hands on his head and bless him. And then he goes on to say, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. An alternate translation for self-discipline is a sound mind. And I kind of like that. He's given us power and love and a sound mind. But we need to fan into flames. We need to maintain the fervency of what's been implanted in us. Much like Timothy needed to remember the strength and boldness that God gave him and to fan it fervently into flame, we need to do that as well. And so the baton in Timothy's case has come from his grandmother Lois to his mother Eunice to Timothy, and we don't know much about those people, but we do know that they greatly influenced him. My wife and I have tried to pass the baton to our daughter, and I use Amanda probably more than I should as an example. But I am so pleased as Amanda's getting married later this year to see how she has shared that baton with her fiance. And we met with them a couple of weeks ago, Easter Sunday afternoon, and it was Andrew that said, hey, let's pray, and he's become a member of the church. He's really going and growing in his faith, and I'm thrilled to see this young man come alive, my future son-in-law, to see the baton being passed. So we're called to fan the flames. The alternative, the other side of that would be to just give in to fear and timidity, as Paul referred to it. But we need to keep that fire going brighter and hotter all the time. And then the very end of that last letter Paul wrote, 2 Timothy 4, 5 through 8, he says, but you keep your head in all situations. When I read that, I remember that Boston Marathon woman that just won this week, and she kept her head. She's way back there, knows that logically this isn't practical, but I'm going to keep at it. She kept her head in the game, and she ended up winning the race. Keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry, for I am already being poured out like a drink offering. The time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. That expression, longed for his appearing, and other translations says have loved his appearing. When are we likely to long for or love the appearing of the Lord? When we are ready, when we're prepared. And Paul is saying, I've done what I can do to be prepared, and I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I come back to that quote from Barbara Bush. Her son said this, our souls are settled because we know hers was. Our souls are settled because we know Mom's soul was settled. And that's what we're called, to have that assurance like Paul had that. I think of a couple other references to longing for the Lord's appearing. John says it in 1 John 2, verse 28. Now, dear children, continue in him so that when he appears, we may be confident and unashamed before him at his coming. We're not afraid of his coming. We're ready. We're confident in that. Or in 1 Peter 5, verse 4, Peter says, when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. So we look forward to that appearing, and we finish the race. And I've selected 2 verses this week for you to keep before you in the days to come. They're both from this second letter to Timothy, chapter 1, verse 8. Would you read that with me? For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. So what will it be for you? Will it be fear and timidity, or power, love, and self-discipline, or a sound mind? Where's that verse from? 2 Timothy 1:8. And then a verse from the last chapter of Paul's letter. Read it with me. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Where is that? 2 Timothy 4:7. You and I need to be able to say that with Paul, that we're determined to finish the race. We're not going to drop out because the going's tough in the first part of the marathon, but we're going to find our legs or find our second wind, and we're going to finish the race because others are counting on us, and we want to one day be able to pass the baton to them as it was passed to us. Amen? Amen.